Hi, I'm Ylli with a special competitive studies project. During our summit on AI+Science, which we just held in Washington, D.C., I had a chance to record my next episode of Memos to the President with Jack Clark, co-founder and head of policy for Anthropic, one of the leading frontier model companies that we have. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did.
Good afternoon, everybody. I know it's always difficult to use the cliche that Jack and I are the last panel before lunch, but I promise you this is going to be a tremendous conversation. I've known Jack for a long time. And so before we start, Jack, welcome, by the way. Welcome to DC. I know you come here a lot, but it's so good to have you at our event.
It's great to be here, and such beautiful weather as well.
Thank you. But I wanted to start by showing the audience a picture of you doing a demo of a large language model at one of our summits in 2022, where nobody knew, here at least, what large language models are. So if we have the picture up, yeah, this is Jack, young Jack from 2022. So as I said, you've been in this journey for a long time. So I wanted to start by asking you just to reflect on where we are now and the journey you have seen to get here.
Well, maybe let's start. I mean, who here has actually used like a large language model in the last week? Just stick your hand up. So that would never have happened, 2 or 3 years ago. 3 years ago, this stuff just wasn't available. 2 years ago, it started to be used in a sort of hobbyist way. And now it's being used by pretty much everyone for a wide set of purposes. Now, the crazy thing is that we all thought that this was going to happen in, 2016 or 2017. But we didn't know exactly when it would arrive. And then we had this amazing boom in recent years, and now it feels like we're really off to the races with a new class of technology that's actually being used. It's a long way from where we were.
One of the things, Jack, that I think I admire about you is you're one of the rare individuals that have really come and visit DC frequently, in the last 7-8 years, I would argue. How has the discourse and dynamics change in DC in understanding AI? We were talking about this where we were in 2018 and how people talked about AI, but you have observed sort of like these dynamics over time.
So I think a few years ago, if you came to DC and talked about AI, people would want to talk to you about 5G and quantum. They'd be like, oh, AI, that sits alongside 5G and quantum and maybe biotech as this basket of important technologies, which is all true. Now, people actually have a pretty sophisticated understanding of it. I've been on the Hill this week, and I've been asked questions about timelines to self-improving AI, whether we could eventually have a loss of control of our AI systems, and also, what to do about the pacing threat of Chinese models like DeepSeek. That's a huge level of kind of AI literacy that we've reached, and a few years ago, I was just being asked about Terminator and HAL 9000.
Yeah, you're right.
I still get asked about that, but now the other stuff as well.
True. Let's talk about, where we are in terms of large language models. Jack, what's your observation with the current state of models? And then my follow-on question would be, how do you see the next 3 to 6 months of this space evolving?
So I think the most important thing to take away from where we are now is that language models are a lot more powerful than most of us think today. We keep on having this phenomenon in AI research where we think to ourselves, could an AI model be good at, say, mathematics? And then we give it a test and we discover that it's actually far better at mathematics than we thought. And the same has been true of physics, biology, a broad set of skills. Additionally, language models today can take actions for you over large periods of time. And I'll just try and give you some intuitions here. So a couple of years ago, if you asked a language model to do a task for you, like translate a sentence or take a simple bit of code and rewrite it into another language, it could do that, and that would be the sort of thing that might take a person 30 seconds or a minute to do. Now we have AI systems where they'll do tasks that might take a person an hour or 2 hours of work to do. It's a huge, huge change, and that's leading to tremendous changes in not just how people use the technology, but what kinds of things become possible. And so when you look to the future, we're a few months away from having AI systems that will be kind of like synthetic employees that sit inside organizations doing tasks for you. We're way beyond interns that occasionally get stuff wrong and need extremely close supervision. And it's more like you can bring a load of junior employees inside your organization and get them to work for you. And that fundamentally changes things. I have a funny story about that from my work, where someone posted on our internal work Slack recently, our AI system is called Claude, and he said, what should I do when Claude is working for me? So his new problem is not just like, how do I do my job? It's what do I spend time on now that I have my like fleet of Claudes doing my job for me? And that illustrates the kinds of challenges we're going to be going through.
No, that's a good point. And so how do you even handle that in a company like yours?
Well, in a company like ours, and I think this is going to be true of everyone, the skill is less now, being able to program, because the AI systems can do that. It's being able to think about the problems that are important, the experiments that you want to run, and sort of how you want to run and manage ambitious projects. Because you now have this phenomenon where it's like everyone has the ability to be a manager of a bunch of quite competent employees, but the competent employees are ones you can only communicate with by email, and they're extremely literal. So you have to get quite good at articulating what you want to happen and figuring out how you describe projects in text. But if you can do that, it completely changes the nature of your work, and it changes how much work can get done and who by.
No, I agree with you 100%. I think the more you use them, you get better at prompting and better about managing and delegating tasks. What were some of the things that you have prompted that it really was an eye-opening moment for you?
There's a couple of things. I think just maybe a personal one is I became a father recently, and so I started writing like a sort of diary about becoming a father. And when you become a parent, it changes your relationship to the world and to your partner. And I was saying like, how can I be a good dad while doing this AI company? And how do I think about the AI revolution? And then I loaded all of it into my AI system, and I said, what is the author of this, personal diary not thinking about? And Claude said, well, despite their references to becoming a father and running an AI company, I don't think this person recognizes the metaphysical shock they're experiencing. And I stared at it, and I got really sort of mad, because it was like, I lived in California, so I had a therapist for a couple of years. It was like when a therapist said something completely dead on, and you got sort of annoyed at them. And I actually went for a 5-hour walk. And then on the walk, I was like, hang on, I'm on a 5-hour walk because a machine which I have built has like criticized me in a way that made sense to me. It's really unusual. The only people that have succeeded at doing that before are like close friends and, my spouse.
Right.
And so I think that illustrates how smart these systems have become. They can look at something and they can make inferences which are not obviously in the text itself. Now that's the kind of personal example, but the professional one I find really interesting, and all of you can probably play around with this on Claude or another language model. Get it to sort of make a game, like a simple game you understand, like tic-tac-toe or snake or breakout, and then say, hey, could you just make this game like much more exciting for me? And the thing will now go away, and it will come back to you with like a version of tic-tac-toe where randomly the board rearranges, or a version of snake where suddenly other snakes appear on the game screen. And it's kind of amazing. You're seeing these things be extremely creative, generate working software for you, and do it in response to like very little prompting. And I think it will illustrate to you just how advanced these things are and how they're more creative than most people think.
Yeah. Before we turn on like some serious topics, I just want to double down on one more question here in terms of, you have a little one now at home. How do you think the future is going to look like for them? In some sci-fi vision that you can see today.
So they'll be in space. No. It's going to be so important that people learn, curiosity. And I think that this is actually something that our education institutions are not especially good at doing today. Is not just, it's hard to teach curiosity, it's more something that needs to be encouraged. And you need to encourage people to play and experiment and have this mindset of messing around with things. Because if we're in a world where you have incredibly powerful AI systems that everyone has access to, the thing that is going to separate one person from another is how kind of creative and original their thinking is and how experimental they're going to be with this technology. So I look at my daughter and I mostly think like, how can I encourage you to have that mindset and to learn how to get the most out of this? And in a policy sense, we're starting to do work at Anthropic on the intersection of AI and education, because in some ways this technology can be an amazing educator that does just that. But in other ways, it can be like a cheat machine that everyone will use to basically be less effective in an education context. And we need to get that part right, especially.
Talking about the future, let's talk a little bit about the international landscape of the AI models. Obviously, very powerful models here in the United States. You have Mistral in France, you have Cohere in Canada. But, we would not have a good conversation if we don't talk about China and their models. Give me a sense of where they are right now. Jack, I know you guys do a lot in terms of analyzing DeepSeek and other models. How do you see this competition evolving?
Yeah, I think the way to think about it is, in the US, the frontier of AI is basically determined by Anthropic, Google, OpenAI, XAI, and perhaps Meta. They've spent a lot of money recently, and they're going to try and train some models, so we'll see in a few months. In China, the major teams are Alibaba, which makes a family of models called Qwen that are very widely used. They're open-weight, broadly accessible models. DeepSeek, which I'm sure all of you have heard of. Moonshot, which makes a model called K2. So now when we talk about Chinese models, we need to remember R1 from DeepSeek and K2 from Moonshot, which is very unsatisfying of them to come up with such unmemorable names, but there you go. And Huawei and Baidu. Where are they? Chinese companies are basically producing models that look as good as the models from the US 6 to 10 months ago. And that sounds like they're relatively close, but the thing to remember is that every 6 months or so, the US companies are spending maybe 4 to 5 times as much on the compute that goes into their models. And this is where attention to things like export controls is going to continue to be incredibly important, and focusing on not exporting chips like, for instance, the H20 from NVIDIA, which is going to show up in research papers from Alibaba and DeepSeek and Moonshot in a few months as the reason they're able to train much better models. So they are behind, but the main limiter is their ability to access frontier compute. And the main thing that we can do as a policy community is focus on export controls. And it was good to see the attention to export controls in the administration's AI action plan today. There just needs to be a lot more attention paid to it if we want to maintain this lead.
Yeah. Speaking of the administration AI blueprint, which was released today, my podcast is called Memos to the President. So just if you had a chance to review the strategy that was released today, your reflection, your comments on how did it look to you?
The main thing that helps you gain competence in understanding this technology is both using it, which we're starting to see and the action plan supports, but also testing it. Throughout the action plan, there is a number of references to having parts of the US government, including Casey within commerce, test out models, both frontier models from companies like Anthropic for national security risks, and we'll be partnering with them on that because it's really important, but also testing out Chinese models. When we tested out DeepSeek's models at Anthropic, we discovered that they would tell you how to do various bioweapon things, but they wouldn't tell you about Tiananmen Square. And that's the kind of thing that's very interesting to find out as you think about how to understand what these things are good and bad at. There's also some references to some real sci-fi stuff, like building cloud-enabled science labs for things like bio and hardware, and that gets the kind of nerdy part of me really excited, because obviously at AI Labs, we all think about giving Claude access to like a laboratory to do its own science. And I think that the administration's being quite, showing a lot of foresight in trying to build that infrastructure.
And all the companies are working with national labs in really in advancing their mission and their goals. You've spent a lot of time in the last 24 hours or 48 hours in DC. What were some of the key recommendations that you have conveyed, here in Washington about what are some of the things we have to do to stay ahead?
It's less a recommendation and more an idea. I think many people look at today's AI, and obviously it's got really, really, really powerful. We're really excited by that. But the actual game that most of the companies are playing is they're trying to build an AI system that can get good enough at research and coding and science to help develop its successor, to have an automated R&D loop where you train an AI system and you say, great, now train a more powerful version of yourself. That is an incredibly powerful technology. It will compound the rate of progress, and it is a technology where if you're able to do that, national advantage becomes something decided by whether you have that capability or not. and the potential safety risks of this technology get away from you really, really quickly. You know, if we had an untrustworthy group of people who were training a whole bunch of students to be just like them, you'd worry a lot because those students would be just as untrustworthy as those people, but you know, there'd be more of them and maybe it would have compounded. That's the problem that we're going to deal with here. So I've been mentioning to policymakers that this is an area that's going to need a lot more attention, because it's going to start to come up more and more, especially in the competition with China, but also how we think about safety issues at home. And I've also talked about export controls, because core to all of this is these models are as good as the compute that you're able to put into them. If you want to maintain frontier leadership in the Western world, you need to ensure that the best compute is available for Western actors. And if you want to lose a competition with China or whoever else, you would give them frontier compute. So don't do that.
Yeah. You spoke in 2022, as I mentioned, you did a demo, which was, before Claude, was Claude. And I think, it went so well. You used great examples. 3 years from now, what do you think your demo would look like if you had to do it here in DC in stage?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this. I think I'll be able to go to a store and buy a drone, and then I'll be able to bring it in the package on stage, open it up, plug the power in, and then ask Claude to take over the drone and fly it around. I think that's the kind of thing that these things are going to be capable of. And if you think about what that requires, it requires understanding a hardware platform that you've had very little preparation for. It requires understanding how to communicate over a network with it, being able to quickly understand a new set of instructions and control it. And it all might sound a bit outlandish, but it gestures at just how smart these things are going to be. It's as if I'd given a really smart MIT graduate that drone, and I'd given them a couple of days to say, hey, figure out how to program it. Right. I am predicting that I'll be able to be on stage here in 3 years, so now I'm really creating a hook for myself here, and I'll be able to do just that.
Yeah, no, we can look forward to that. And then lastly, we at SCSP, we have a national security mission that we care about. In your mind, what are some of the most national security risks that are coming in the near future from these models that you can envision?
Now, there's two types of risks that we track, and all of the AI platforms today are doing, threat reports of things that we see on our platforms. And what we see here is, criminals and non-state actors use the tools that are available to them. So they used to use other tools for disinformation or making, malware or things for cybercrime. Now they're trying to use this technology for that. So we'll see a rise in what you might think of as retail harms from national security that need to be monitored. We're also going to see some of our rivals, especially state actors, become accelerated by the use of this technology. If this technology is like giving someone access to a bunch of, synthetic colleagues, as I've talked about, then a hacking team that today has 100 people on it will be like a hacking team that has 1,000 people on it. So my worry, and I've been saying this while I've been in DC this week, is if we don't aggressively adopt and integrate this technology into our own national security enterprise, it doesn't matter how good we are, because at some point, even if you're exceptionally good, if there's a few thousand of you and 100,000 of the other people, you're probably in a much tougher situation. So getting that right is super important.
No, I agree. And just to your point, Jack, my biggest concern is AI adoption. Because I think we can have the best models, but if China has a bigger adoption across all their sectors, public and private, then I think, the country that has a bigger adoption, I think at the end of the day could win.
Absolutely.
How worried are you about the AI adoption? How do you overcome that?
It's got better, but it's all still slower than the private sector. And I think that private sector organizations that move quickly on this have a few things in common. They have a highly empowered leader who wants it to get done, and they have someone who works for that leader whose job is dealing with the internal vetocracy that exists in any large organization to stop you bringing new technology into the building. And I think that government struggles with both of these issues more because for various reasons they have less innate flexibility from the private sector to change those things. So finding ways to empower senior leaders and finding ways to really bring the costs of certain types of bureaucracy to light so that you can solve them is going to be key to unlocking adoption here.
Jack, I want to thank you. I know you have a busy calendar. Thank you for dropping by. Always appreciate it. Best of luck to you and Anthropic, and please join me in thanking Jack with a round of applause.
Thank you, everyone.